Like and subscribe right now, or else this will be in your bed tonight. r/AskReddit by Planet Reddit. What was the most inappropriate time you couldn't control your laughter? My family tried moving my elderly grandparents into a nursing home. It was basically an experiment to see if they liked it and could deal with living in a new place. Well, my grandfather, who has lived in the same house since birth, was very angry about this move. The minute they arrived at the nursing home, he started acting out, dropping his pants in the hallway, sticking his tongue out at everyone, and being generally disagreeable. Myself and 2 other family members decided to join them for the first dinner at the new place. Walking over from their room to the dining room went smoothly, but once we got to the doors of the dining room, my grandfather stopped, clicked his heels together, stood at attention, and then promptly stuck up his arm and yelled "Heil Hitler." Then he goose-stepped his way to his table. It was horrible, but I could not stop laughing. To this day, it makes me laugh just thinking about it. I would like your grandparents. Haha, thanks. My grandfather has dementia, which has caused him to turn into a world-class troll. I was in a seminar where a distinguished physiologist was talking about his research. He started talking about measuring enzyme activities, specifically the enzyme cytochrome C oxidase, which is shortened to COX. He was summarizing a slide and said, "And that was for those of you who are into COX." I burst out laughing. I was the only one. People stared. I still couldn't stop laughing. I went so red from trying to hold it in. So awkward. Everybody else was laughing on the inside. They just pretended to act all mature and fancy. Elitist bastards. I'm in nursing school. In my last class, we had to watch a video about people who had their children pass away, or had stillbirths. It was quite a sad video. Someone in the video was talking about their child's funeral, and mentioned that saying anything is better than saying nothing at all to the parents who had lost their children. She mentioned that someone told her, "Congratulations," on accident. I don't know why, but I lost it. Burst out laughing and couldn't stop for a good 5 minutes. All eyes were on me. I felt horrible. But if you were watching it, you'd probably laugh. 2. My mom told me a story about watching a video in nursing school about postpartum depression. She said at one point in the movie, there was a clip of a super hillbilly woman wailing, "I don't like my baby and I don't know why." My mom said she lost her shit laughing. And then the rest of the class started cracking up. 2. The instructor restarted the video and told them they had to rewatch it until they could get through that part without laughing. And there they sat, for the rest of eternity. A few years ago, I went with my best friend to her grandpa's funeral. He was a veteran, so there were a lot of other veterans there as well. Everyone was sitting inside the church. The priest was doing the funeral mass. I was sitting next to my best friend. She was crying. On the other side of her was one of the veterans. He started coughing and accidentally let out a fart. The fart seemed to shock him and he exclaimed, "Oof." I couldn't help but laugh as silently as possible. Which wasn't really that silent. I felt so bad but still couldn't stop. I looked over to my friend to see if she was pissed at me, but realized that she was laughing too. That made me feel better. I was at a religious assembly and the speaker encouraged all of us 300 plus kids to start rubbing sandpaper on our little shards of wood in order to make everything new as Jesus did. As everyone started rubbing, my friend whispered to me that it sounds like a bunch of people furiously masturbating. I cracked up silently. But when the speaker said this is a sound many of you have heard before, I lost it. Rubbing sandpaper on our little shards of wood. Sounds like a bunch of people violently masturbating to me too. There was a boy in band class who tried to get out of doing something, I can't remember what it was, by saying his sister just got diagnosed with cancer. I just started busting up. I knew he was lying because he didn't have a sister. But everyone believed him and I got the nastiest looks from all 60 people in the room. Which made me laugh even more. Edit. Just so you know, he was kind of forced to tell the truth in the end. But even after everyone berated him for lying about something so serious, I was still the ass who laughed at it. Worth it. I knew he was lying because he didn't have a sister. But everyone believed him. Then why didn't you say anything? Farted so loud during a rally it echoed throughout the entire gym. This was during the 8th grade. We were doing some kind of fundraiser for this kid that got hit on his bike a week before. The vice principal was talking about what exactly was wrong with him when I felt one a brewing. So I leaned into my buddy Eric next to me and said, "Hey, I got a secret to tell you." I let it rip and comes out much louder than I expected. Was sitting Indian style on the gym floor. The sound echoed out through the entire gym while everyone was dead silent. Even the VP went silent. While Eric and I were laughing our asses off. We get pulled out of the rally by my history teacher asking why we thought it would be funny to disrupt our VP like that. Through my laughter, I tried to explain I didn't know it was going to be that loud but ended up that way. Ended up getting 3 days detention for that shit. But it was well worth it. 3 days detention for farting? Bro. They thought I did it on purpose. I did. But didn't think it would be loud enough for the whole gym to hear. It didn't help that I wouldn't stop laughing when I said sorry. So they didn't really believe me. In psychology class my teacher was talking about probability for some reason and kept saying the chance of getting head. Each time he said it I burst out in laughter to the point where my teacher got quite pissed and had a rant about our immaturity. Getting head is almost as funny as getting tail. I'm no psychology buff. But I can't think of a context where the chance of getting head isn't talking about a BJ. When the pregnant lady whose groceries I was bagging had her water break mid credit card swipe. Beep sploosh giggle. Unemployment 2K12 no regrets. What console is that on? Welfare. Several years ago I was at a funeral with my brothers. A fairly distant family member that we didn't know that well had died. We had been there for ages. And we got really bored. So we tried to tell each other the shittiest jokes possible to pass time. But not laugh too much. My older brother came up with knock knock who's there? Lettuce who? Lettuce in. For some reason. Maybe the completely deadpan way he said it. Me and my younger brother started laughing. And I just couldn't stop. So there I was. In the middle of a crowd of people waiting for my family member to be buried. Just laughing hysterically. Full stop. I do think there's something about funerals that makes that happen. It's the knowing that you can't laugh that makes it almost certain you will. I mean obviously not if it's someone you loved very much. The old pretending you're crying trick is useful though. I was at a super fancy violin recital. All dressed up in heels and pearls. There was a dramatic pause in the music and I couldn't help thinking. Good God. If someone dropped ass right now, it would echo up to the rafters. I learned that day that there's only so long you can disguise helpless laughter as coughing before old ladies in fur coats shame you out of a concert hall with just their eyes. I honestly have no idea what dropping ass means or refers to. Could you explain? It's a phrase for farting that I picked up from a friend. In intermediate, 7th 8th grade, school, we had a media program where we'd do a morning broadcast every day. We'd rotate between producers, camera techs, and broadcast anchors. This was the day my friend and I were both anchors. Beforehand, we were joking around about poi, it's a Hawaiian dish made of mashed up taro, and we calm down before we start the broadcast. As soon as I start saying my lines, he whispers to me, poi, and I burst out laughing. I go on for a few seconds and I try to compose myself. And he tries to take over for me. But then he starts laughing too. Remember that this is live in front of the entire school. This goes on for a little over a full minute of us trying to start our lines but just laughing. We didn't get into any trouble for it. Because our teacher loved us and said it happens. I'm late to the party but I'll still comment. 2 years ago my best friend died of an enlarged heart. It just happened. Nothing could have been done to prevent or treat it. I was pretty devastated by the whole event and had to play a major role in his funeral. Giving the eulogy. After the service and at the gravesite, the priest came up to say the final blessings. Now, my friend was a pretty serious atheist who married a Japanese woman. His conservative white parents were never fans of the union. So they made it a very abrupt point of the service to give the casket cross to her and say, and I quote, "Yuka, Please accept this cross as a symbol of our faith. And Derek's faith. Hopefully, one day you can accept Jesus into your heart. Now, I knew this bullshit was coming, so I rolled my eyes and dealt with it. However, after that, the priest said please remain silent while they raised Derek into his grave. He was places in a wall as opposed to buried. At that point a forklift, a ducking forklift, came and doing its backup beep sound. I lost it. I absolutely lost it. I just started busting up laughing. Here I am, 26 and burying the closest person I know, and a forklift is just jerking the casket around. I am laughing so hard that my mother, who gets the absurdity of the situation, starts laughing. Scowls are in abundance and people actually have told me I was so rude for it. But Derek was my best friend, and I know if it was me in that casket and that forklift beeped and jerked, he would have laughed too. And for that I love him. Always. I was in 8th grade chapel. A guest lady was speaking about something biblical and I wasn't really listening, but suddenly she said, "And the coke crows." I put coke in caps because she emphasized that word and even did a little pause and sorta looked around after it. Being the 8th grader that I was, I burst out laughing and couldn't contain my laughter in the middle of chapel. No shame. A funeral. For a 2-year-old baby girl. They had a terrible ducking folk singer play a song. She couldn't play the guitar in time with her voice and she had this funny, high-pitched, warbling voice. I have no ducking clue who she was or who thought it would be a good idea for her to be there. But I couldn't help laughing. If I hadn't known any better, I would have been looking for hidden TV cameras. It was that bad a performance. I just kind of put my face in my hands. Pretended I was crying. I walked outside to cool down. I felt terrible. But even now I roll my eyes at that singer. At a funeral where there were bagpipes playing. When the players started packing the bagpipes into the back of a small car while the funeral was still proceeding, the squashed bagpipes made the most peculiar honking cries. It was very difficult for me to maintain my composure. As I have a brother who is a piper, I can confirm this noise is one of the most difficult to keep a straight face to. Edit. In italics. Oh man. I finally have a good story to submit for once. It was in my AP history class in high school. That day in class, we were watching a movie about the Holocaust. However, this movie was insanely boring. I mean, they were talking about the most mind-numbing details. I swear they spent like 10 minutes just talking about where they got the lumber from. So after about an hour of staring at shots of German scenery and trying not to fall asleep, I feel a tap on my shoulder. I turn to see my friend sitting next to me giggling. I ask him what's so funny and he turns to point at our friend who is sitting across the room. Our friend wasn't doing as good of a job at staying awake, so he's sitting over there doing the head nod, you know, where you fall asleep and your head drops so you jerk awake and give yourself whiplash. I still don't know why, but something about that was hilarious to me, so I started giggling. Right then, I hear my teacher clear his throat and I look up to see him glaring at me because I just so happened to start laughing at the exact moment this movie decides to show all of the mass graves and disfigured bodies. I realized that I had to look like the most racist person in the world right then, which makes me laugh even harder. I couldn't stop laughing at that point, so all I could do was put my head down and try my best to stifle my laughter until the end of class. My teacher never looked at me the same way again. TL. Doctor, I laughed during a movie in history. Teacher thinks I'm a neo-Nazi. I would have leaned my head on the desk, cover it with my hands and pretend to be crying. You clever little ducker. My 7th grade history teacher had the whole class stand close together with our eyes closed in one corner of the room to simulate being on a slave ship. We were told to imagine how it would have felt being chained together in a dark, tight space. I couldn't help but imagine if one of the slaves farted and being chained together, nobody could get away from it. I started to quietly chuckle, and my teacher yells, "It's not funny," in a super offended tone. I think I got away with it since all our eyes were closed, and if anyone looked to see who it was, I put on my best poker face and acted like it wasn't me who was laughing. You should have let one rip right then and there. To be fair, Your teacher kinda had it coming for actually thinking that a bunch of 7th graders were going to be enriched by that experience. Beyond the humiliation of being made to stand in the corner with a bunch of other pubescent kids. Close your eyes and pretend you're thinking about the plight of slaves instead of, oh my god, the girl behind me is almost touching me with her boobs, oh shit shit, which way do I move? My best friend at the time took me to her childhood friend's house so she could introduce us and I guess become friends. The afternoon was going just fine. We were goofing off and making stupid jokes all day. And then his dad came home from work. I asked him where his mom was and what she did for work. He looked at me and said in the same goofy tone, she's dead. I totally thought he was kidding and laughed my face off. When my friend told me he wasn't kidding, I just laughed harder because I felt awkward. The laughter went on for a good 5 minutes and the entire time I kept apologizing. Laughs, I am so sorry. Laughter continues. I was in my algebra II class last year. The teacher had just passed out the homework. So it was pretty much silent in the room. Suddenly, this girl behind me sneezed and then immediately farted. Think. Show off. I looked over at my friend who was busy suppressing his laughter and I just lost it. For the next 10 minutes. My body was shaking from trying not to laugh. Which just made it worse. A guy with one arm came into work. And a co-worker walked up to him and asked, "Hi. Do you need a hand?" Then they both kind of just looked at each other while I turned away and walked elsewhere in the store to hide. If there is anyone reading this who only has one hand. If anyone ever does this to you. Please grab their hand while saying yes. This one will do. Job interview. I was nervous and had 2 coffees and spent the morning watching cat videos on YouTube. I didn't get the job. You weren't applying to Reddit, were you? I'd show up every day. One of my best friends was sitting front and center at our college theater production. Audience of about 300, tripping her face off on acid. She has a very distinct, and some would say shrill, piercing, annoying laugh. The play began. And she began to laugh at each line in the show as if it was the most hilarious punchline you've ever heard. Every line. It was so ridiculous that the other people in the audience thought it was part of the show and that it was some new theater technique. So they all started laughing every time she laughed. The actors got really messed up and I could see the confusion on their faces. Then the audience got it after about 15 minutes of us laughing getting funnier and funnier. And then followed the most awkward silence tension I've ever witnessed in my life. The kind of awkwardness where being a fly is being about 2000x too big. Yep. And it wasn't even me. My friend asked me to go to Christmas mass one year. I'm not a believer but went along as a favor. The local Catholic church is huge but by the time we got there it was standing room only. So we stood at the back. After a while we noticed there was a little boy in the back pew who kept staring at me. I'd been ignoring him for about half an hour when, just as the priest said, "Let us pray," and everything got real quiet. My friend turns to me and says, "He thinks you're his dad." I lost my shit completely. I spent the rest of the service desperately trying to maintain some kind of composure and be respectful. But that little bastard just kept turning around. I imagine everyone who saw me standing there, shaking, red-faced, with tears streaming must have thought I was having a really profound religious experience. Your friend is a genius humorist. I laughed way too long at this. This is my favorite. This joke is the brother joke to pointing at a weird person in a bar/crowd and asking your friend, "Why is your dad here?" I have a tendency to burst out laughing when someone dies unexpectedly or by some creative means in movies. What? There's a heavy dramatic scene and the female walks out into the street? POW. The bus smacks her in front of the horrified male's face. Cue the dramatic music and me laughing like a hyena in the background. That one part in Taken. You guys know what I'm talking about. I absolutely lost it. I like the ending. We can nagoti boom. At the funeral of a girl who shot herself in the chest. They're playing a video of pictures with sad music. And I grab a Bible and set it in my lap. On the cover it said Bible. Special edition. My best friend leans over and whispers that the Bible I have is better than a normal one because of the director's commentary from God and Moses. I was laughing so hard my eyes teared up and I covered my face. Afterwards everyone was trying to console me because they thought I was sobbing with grief. Everybody consoling me would just make me laugh that much harder. I was at my girlfriend's brother's wedding when I was 15. The best man was my girlfriend's other brother. He is always a joker and is one of those guys who has me in tears every time I see him. He starts a speech about how he always looked up to his brother, the groom, and then pretended to cry. I was right in front of the top table, and I laughed loudly for a couple of seconds. Turns out he is actually crying, and I am on the wedding video laughing at him while he is crying sentimentally. Luckily he sees the funny side. When my best friend arrived at school looking incredibly sad and teary and telling me a family member had died, she was so quiet and really held back on telling me who it was. I was freaking out asking if her grandparents, cousins etc were okay when she suddenly blurted out that her old, senile, grumpy ass cat had died. The laugh escaped before I even knew it was there. I guess I was just so relieved that it wasn't an actual person who'd died. If that makes sense. Disclaimer: I do in fact love animals. I just was not particularly fond of this bastard cat that continually left his shit in random rooms of her house for us to find. 2 stories. One about me. One about my dad. 1. I was at a wedding just a couple of months ago. At the reception, I sat at a table with a bunch of good friends. The bride's dad started to say grace before the meal started, and half the table just ducking lost it for no reason. Everybody was definitely staring at us. 2. My dad is a chemist, and thus goes to many conferences all around the world. A little over 10 years ago, he had to go to a conference in Austria, and decided to bring my mom and I along for a few days. While he was going to conference sessions, my mom and I were exploring the small village that was hosting the conference. We met up with my dad for lunch after one of the sessions, and he was chuckling to himself. We asked what happened, and he explained. He had been in a session about electrodes. The presenter was a Japanese man who kept pronouncing it erectodes. My dad couldn't contain himself and just started laughing his ass off in a room filled with distinguished chemists and Nobel laureates. He eventually had to excuse himself from the session because he couldn't stop laughing. Erectron sounds like a villain in a really bad porn parody of Transformers. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for 3 videos a day.